This isn't a museum, ma'am. This is the tip of the spear. We need operators, not relics, the words, sharp and dripping with condescension, sliced through the sterile, conditioned air of the Aegis Combat System Training and Readiness Center. The crowd of young, sharp-jawed lieutenants and ensigns, all crisp flight suits and eager ambition, chuckled. It was a nervous, sycophantic sound, the kind that subordinates make when a superior flexes his authority. They glanced from the source of the insult, Commander Marcus Davis, to its target, and their smirks tightened. The target, a woman whose name they hadn't bothered to learn, offered no reaction. She stood perfectly still, a study in placid neutrality. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, regulation bun, revealing threads of silver at her temples that seemed to offend Davis on a personal level. Her face was a landscape of quiet experience, not the smooth, unlined canvas of the fresh-faced academy graduates surrounding her. She wore the same standard-issue navy blue coveralls as everyone else, but hers seemed to hang with a different weight, a comfortable indifference to presentation. Commander Davis, a man whose personality was as starched and rigid as his collar, took another step toward her. His own chest was a billboard of achievement, ribbons and badges proclaiming a career of loud, visible success. He saw her unadorned uniform as a sign of vacancy, of a career stalled or just beginning too late in life. He saw her silence not as strength, but as weakness. He saw her age not as experience, but as obsolescence. But when Admiral Rostova, observing from the darkened gallery above, saw her stance, he saw something else entirely. He saw a posture he hadn't seen in 15 years, a specific, subtle alignment of feet and shoulders, a center of gravity so perfectly balanced it was almost inhuman. It was the stance of a person who had spent 10,000 hours in a state of absolute, unblinking focus. The Admiral leaned forward, his heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat against his ribs. Down on the floor, Davis, drunk on the attention of his acolytes, reached out and with a theatrical flourish, tore the Velcro-backed lieutenant commander rank insignia from her shoulder. The ripping sound was loud in the suddenly quiet room. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," he sneered, holding the small fabric rectangle up for all to see. "You can have his back when you prove you can keep up." The woman didn't flinch. Her eyes, a calm and distant gray, remained fixed on the primary tactical display, a vast, dark screen that would soon become her canvas. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type silence below. The commander held a rank patch between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a captured battle standard, a trophy from skirmish he had already decisively won. The young officers, his audience, and his jury shifted their weight, their amusement now mixed with a palpable discomfort. The act of physically stripping a fellow officer of their rank, even a temporary training patch, was a profound violation of protocol and decorum. It was a public shaming, a brutal assertion of dominance that crossed a line from harsh leadership into pure humiliation. Yet no one spoke. They were caught in the gravitational pull of Davis's authority and their own ambition. To challenge him was to risk becoming his next target. So they watched, their silence a form of complicity. Lieutenant Commander Eva Rostova, now rankless in the eyes of the room, did not look at her bare shoulder. She did not look at the sneering face of Commander Davis. She did not acknowledge the gallery of smirking peers. Her world had contracted to the space of her console, the tactical director's station. Her focus was a physical thing, a shield that deflected the petty indignities being heaped upon her. Her breathing remained slow and even, a quiet metronome in the cathedral of buzzing servers and humming ventilation. Her hands, which Davis had privately mocked as better suited for a garden than a billion-dollar combat system, began their work. There was no haste, no anger, no tremor of adrenaline. They moved with a serene, methodical grace, a practiced economy of motion that was in itself a language. A finger tapped here, bringing up a diagnostic overlay that no one else in the room had ever seen. A soft keystroke there, running a preemptive integrity check on the system's archaic manual input subroutines, a digital appendix long thought vestigial. The younger officers, trained on the sleek, automated interfaces of the modern Aegis baselines, saw her actions as quaint, even pointless. They were whispering about legacy commands, about dusty code that hadn't been relevant since before they were born. They saw a woman clinging to the past. Davis saw confirmation of his prejudice. Getting the old girl warmed up, are we? He quipped, tossing her rank patch onto the corner of her console. Don't worry. The system does most of the work for you. Just try not to spill your coffee on it. The laughter this time was weaker, more strained. The joke had fallen flat, overshadowed by the sheer, unnerving stillness of its target. Eva's silence was no longer passive. It was becoming active, a dense, heavy presence in the room. It was the silence of a coiled spring, the calm at the heart of a hurricane. It was a silence that promised a reckoning. The lights in the training center dimmed, leaving only the ethereal glow of the massive screens. The main display, a 50-foot expanse of tactical data, flickered to life. A map of the South China Sea materialized, dotted with friendly blue icons representing Carrier Strike Group 9. At the center of it all was the USS Ronald Reagan, their virtual command. Simulation commencing, a disembodied voice announced. Scenario, Black Star. Good luck. A collective tension seized the room. Black Star wasn't a training exercise. It was a ghost story, a piece of institutional folklore designed by the Navy's most sadistic programmers. It was the Kobayashi Maru of the Aegis system, an unwinnable scenario designed to push the combat suite and its human operators to catastrophic failure. No team had ever survived it. On the screen, the nightmare began. Red icons bloomed on the periphery like a fatal rash. From the north, a swarm of J-20 stealth fighters, their radar signatures barely a whisper. From the east, a saturation attack of DF-21D, carrier killer, ballistic missiles on a terminal descent. From the west, a wolf pack of nuclear submarines launching a volley of waycoming torpedoes. Simultaneously, a massive electronic warfare assault began, filling the screens with static and ghost targets, turning the tactical picture into a blizzard of false information. Alarms blared, a cacophony of synthesized terror. The automated Aegis system, the pride of the fleet, began to choke. Its processors, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of threats and conflicting data, started to lag. The Phalanx CIWS guns, the last line of defense, spun uselessly, unable to lock onto the stealth fighters. The SM-3 interceptors launched erratically, chasing phantom signals while the real ballistic missiles screamed down from the heavens. Commander Davis, his earlier arrogance dissolving into a thin sheen of sweat, began barking orders. Engage Threat Axis Alpha. Prioritize the ballistic missiles. Somebody give me a clean picture. His voice was tight with rising panic. The young officers, paragons of modern training, moved with frantic energy, their fingers flying across their touch screens. But they were merely rearranging the deck chairs on a digital Titanic. The system was failing at a fundamental level. It was too smart, too automated, too reliant on perfect data in a deliberately imperfect world. On the main screen, a red icon representing a DF-21D slipped past the outer defensive ring. Then another. A simulated impact warning flashed. Impact warning, carrier. 60 seconds, the room was filled with a quiet, desperate litany of failure. I can't get a lock. The EW is too strong. Torpedoes are in the baffles. Davis stared at the screen, his face ashen. He was about to do the only thing he could. In sim, he started to say, his voice cracking. But his words were swallowed by a new sound. A quiet, steady, rhythmic click-clack-click from the tactical director's station. The chaotic symphony of alarms and panicked voices faltered, momentarily silenced by the stark, deliberate sound emanating from Eva Rostova's console. All eyes turned to her. The change in her demeanor was subtle, but absolute. Her back was straighter, her head tilted at a precise angle. Her eyes no longer calm, but blazing with an intensity that seemed to burn through the screen in front of her. Her hands, which had been moving with such methodical grace, were now a blur, a whirlwind of controlled, precise motion. But she wasn't using the touchscreen. Her fingers danced across the dusty, forgotten manual keyboard below the main console, a relic that most operators used as a coffee stand. The rhythmic clicking was the sound of a master craftsman at her work. "What is she doing?" An ensign whispered, his voice filled with a confusion that was rapidly turning to awe. On the main screen, something impossible was happening. A cascade of green text scrolled down a small, newly opened window in the corner of Eva's display. It was raw command line code, a language as ancient and powerful as Latin. She was bypassing the entire Aegis graphical interface, talking directly to the system's core. She's initiated a Chimera protocol. Someone breathed from the observation gallery. The term meant nothing to the operators on the floor, but to the Admiral, it was everything. The automated safety interlocks, the very systems designed to prevent human error, began to flash with override warnings. Eva dismissed them with single, contemptuous keystrokes. She was performing open-heart surgery on a dying god of war. The first command manually slaved the spy, 1D radar array to a secondary fire control loop, bypassing the compromised primary processor. The blizzard of electronic warfare static on the main screen flickered and then vanished, replaced by a clean, crisp tactical picture. The ghost targets evaporated, leaving only the true threats, stark and terrifying. "Lock. I have a solid lock on the ballistic missiles," a lieutenant shouted, his voice cracking with disbelief. Before Davis could even process what had happened, Eva's fingers flew again. She entered a string of commands that forcibly networked the combat systems of the entire strike group, linking the SM-3s on the cruisers with the SM-6s on the destroyers, creating a single, unified web of fire. The system had been designed to do this automatically, but had failed. She was doing it by hand, in seconds. "Launch authorization granted," she said, her first words of the entire exercise. Her voice was a low, clear monotone, devoid of any emotion, but it cut through the room like a diamond. On the screen, a flurry of blue interceptor icons launched in a perfect, coordinated swarm, not at the missiles themselves, but at a calculated point in space where the missiles would be. It was a shot that defied the system's own logic. A moment later, the sky on the screen lit up as the entire volley of DF-21DS was annihilated in a single, brilliant flash. A collective gasp went through the room. But Eva wasn't finished. With the ballistic threat gone, her fingers typed another volley of code. She seized control of the carrier's advanced electronic warfare suite, not to jam the incoming fighters, but to do something far more audacious. She fed them a false signal, a ghost image of the carrier 2 miles north of its actual position. The swarm of J-20s, believing their stealth was intact, adjusted their course, converging on empty ocean. Then, with the fighters perfectly grouped, Eva unleashed the strike group's own fighters, which had been holding in reserve. It wasn't a dogfight, it was an execution. The final threat, the torpedoes, were now seconds from impact. The automated anti-submarine systems were still offline. With another series of keystrokes, Eva did something that made the Admiral above clutch the railing. She activated the ship's sonar not as a passive listening device, but as an active, high-frequency pulse weapon, a theoretical function known as a sonar blast, a wave of pure sound energy, lethal to torpedo guidance systems, erupted from the carrier. The red torpedo icons on the screen wavered and then winked out, their digital ghost silenced. The room was plunged into an impossible, deafening silence. Every alarm was off. Every threat was gone. The main screen, once a portrait of certain doom, now showed only the placid blue icons of the strike group, safe and untouched in a tranquil sea. Then, in the center of the screen, 2 words appeared in large, block letters: "Mission success." For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. They stared at the screen, then at the quiet woman at the console, then back at the screen. Commander Davis stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. The sneer had been wiped from his face, replaced by a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. "That's not possible," he whispered to no one. "That's not possible." The silence that followed was a physical entity, heavier than any sound. It was the silence of shattered paradigms, of Farragut Sea confronted with undeniable, miraculous competence. Every eye in the room was fixed on the unassuming woman at the tactical director's station, who was now calmly running a post-mission diagnostic, her movements just as methodical as they had been before the storm she had single-handedly weathered. The spell was broken by the sound of a single set of footsteps, crisp and authoritative, descending the metal stairs from the observation gallery. The sea of young officers parted instinctively, turning to see the imposing figure of Admiral Rostova, commander of the Pacific Fleet, striding onto the simulation floor. His face was a granite mask of controlled emotion, but his eyes, fixed on one person and one person alone, held a universe of pride and history. He ignored the salutes that snapped up around him. He walked past the frozen form of Commander Davis, as if he were a piece of furniture. He did not stop until he was standing directly behind Eva's chair. She didn't turn, her focus still on the lines of code scrolling on her screen. The Admiral stood there for a moment, simply observing the quiet aftermath of her work. Then he spoke, his voice not loud, but carrying an intrinsic weight that commanded absolute attention. "Commander Davis," he said, his tone as cold and sharp as Arctic ice. Davis flinched as if struck. "Sir," he managed to stammer, his face pale. The Admiral didn't turn to look at him. He kept his gaze on Eva's back. "You spoke of relics," the Admiral began, his voice resonating through the silent room. "You spoke of museums. It's a common mistake for men who have only ever read the book to not recognize the author when she's standing right in front of them." A ripple of confusion went through the younger officers. The Admiral gestured vaguely at the main screen, where the words "Mission Success" still glowed. "What you just witnessed was not in your training manuals. It is not part of the current Aegis baseline. In fact, most of the Navy's top programmers would tell you that what she just did is theoretically impossible. A manual override of that complexity, under that level of system degradation and electronic attack, it's a ghost story. A myth." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "A myth called Project Chimera." The Admiral's voice dropped slightly, taking on a storyteller's cadence, and every person in the room leaned in, desperate to understand the miracle they had just witnessed. "In the late 1990s, he continued, his eyes still locked on the back of Eva's head, a few of us became concerned that our combat systems were becoming too smart, too automated. We worried that in our quest for technological perfection, we were engineering the human element out of the equation. We feared a day when a new kind of warfare, something we couldn't predict, would fool our machines. So, a black project was born. Top secret. Its goal, to build a neurological backdoor into the Aegis system. A manual override protocol that wasn't just a set of backup commands, but a complete, alternate operating system, one that could be piloted by a single, sufficiently skilled human operator. We needed someone who understood the code at a granular level, but who also thought like a warrior, who could feel the rhythm of a battle in their bones. We needed an architect who was also a virtuoso. He finally turned his head, slowly, and pinned Commander Davis with a gaze that could strip paint. We called it Project Chimera. And the lead designer, the chief architect, the ghost in the machine who wrote every line of the code you just saw, was a brilliant young lieutenant with a mind like a diamond. He let the implication hang in the air, thick and heavy. The young officers stared, their minds racing, connecting the impossible dots. They looked at the quiet, middle-aged woman, and then at the Admiral, and a shocking, unbelievable truth began to dawn on them. The project was officially decommissioned in 2005, the Admiral said, his voice hardening again. The official reason was that no single human could possibly possess the cognitive speed, tactical awareness, and system knowledge to pilot it effectively in a real-world combat scenario. It was deemed too difficult, too dangerous. The lead architect retired from the Navy to pursue a quiet life in the private sector. The Chimera Protocol was buried, locked away in the system's deepest archives, a theoretical weapon that would never be used. He took a step closer to the console and for the first time addressed Eva directly, his voice softening with a profound, paternal warmth that stunned the room into a new level of silence. But she never forgot. The architect never forgets the shape of her creation. He looked down at the discarded rank patch lying on the console. He picked it up gently. "Commander Davis," he said, his voice now dangerously calm. "You asked for an operator. You have been given the architect. You demanded the tip of the spear. You have been graced by the presence of the woman who forged it." He then turned his full attention to Eva, his stern, Admiral's facade melting away completely, replaced by something raw and deeply personal. He held out the patch. "Eva," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that no one in that room had ever heard from him. "Daughter, I had a feeling you couldn't stay away forever." The word daughter detonated in the room, a revelation so profound it was almost incomprehensible. The quiet, Unassuming woman was Admiral Rostova's daughter, the architect of the Navy's greatest secret weapon, a living legend. Davis's face crumpled, the last vestiges of his pride turning to ash. The Admiral then looked past Davis to his aide. "Captain," he ordered, his voice snapping back to steel. "See to it that Commander Davis is relieved of his training command, effective immediately. Find him a desk, preferably one without people. He has a lot to learn about the difference between rank and respect." The story of what happened in the Aegis Training Center spread through the fleet not like wildfire, but like a pressure wave from an underwater detonation, silent, powerful, and utterly transformative. It didn't travel through official channels or after-action reports, which were immediately classified at the highest level. Instead, it moved through the fleet's secret nervous system, the hushed conversations in wardrooms, the encrypted messages between chiefs, the late-night calls between former squadron mates. It became known by different names. Some called it the Rostova Override. Others, who had heard whispers of the Old Black Project, called it the Chimera's Gambit, but most simply called it the day the architect came home. The legend wasn't about the Admiral's daughter humiliating a pompous commander. That was merely the dramatic catalyst. The core of the legend was about competence. It was a story about a quiet, unassuming professional who, when faced with an impossible situation, didn't complain, didn't panic, and didn't boast. She simply performed. She did the work. Her actions became a new gold standard, a parable for every sailor who felt overlooked, for every technician who knew the system better than the officer who commanded it, for every quiet professional who let their results speak for them. The narrative was intoxicating because it confirmed a deeply held belief within the military's working class, that true value lay not in the shine of one's shoes or the number of ribbons on one's chest, but in the cool, undeniable ability to perform under pressure. For Commander Marcus Davis, the aftermath was a swift and brutal education. He wasn't court-martialed or formally reprimanded. He was simply moved. His new office was in a forgotten corner of Naval Base Coronado, a windowless room where he was tasked with reviewing decade-old procurement contracts for bureaucratic compliance. It was a career coffin, but something inside him had broken that day, something brittle and vain. The humiliation had been so absolute, so public, and so thoroughly deserved that it had cauterized his arrogance. Weeks later, there was a fleet-wide seminar on asymmetrical threats and system vulnerabilities. The keynote speaker was a civilian analyst, and the central case study was a heavily redacted, anonymized account of the Black Star simulation. The analyst presented the unknown operator's actions as a theoretical model for future doctrine. From the back of the auditorium, a man stood up during the Q&A. It was Marcus Davis, looking thinner, his uniform immaculate but without its former swagger. "I was there," he said, his voice quiet and steady, capturing the attention of the entire room. "I was the training commander, and I want to say, for the record, that the operator was Lieutenant Commander Eva Rostova. And I was wrong. I judged her by every metric except the one that mattered: competence. We should not be studying this as a theoretical model. We should be begging her to teach us." A stunned silence fell over the auditorium, followed by a ripple of quiet, respectful applause. It was a public act of contrition, a final, necessary step in his humbling. Eva Rostova, the architect of this burgeoning legend, seemed entirely unaffected by it. She did not attend the seminars where her work was discussed. She did not accept the offers for prestigious teaching positions at the Naval War College. She politely declined the personal commendations from the Secretary of the Navy. Her father, the Admiral, understood. Validation was a currency she had never valued. Instead, she was found where she was most comfortable, in the quiet, forgotten corners of the machine. The young lieutenants and ensigns who had smirked at her now sought her out, not with the sycophantic energy they had once shown Davis, but with a quiet, almost reverent respect. They found her not in a classroom, but in the chilly, humming server room behind the main simulation center, a place they had never thought to enter. She was sitting on a stool in front of an old, green-screen CRT monitor, a maintenance terminal that accessed the Aegis system's most foundational code. She was patient with them. She didn't lecture or moralize. She simply showed them. "The system is designed to protect you from failure," she explained, her voice soft as she pointed to a block of code. But that protection also limits its potential. It builds a cage of logic. Sometimes, to win, you have to be willing to open the cage and fly it yourself. She taught them the old languages, the manual commands, the philosophy behind the architecture. She showed them how the system breathed, how it thought, how to feel its rhythms. She was teaching them not just to be operators, but to be mechanics, to be engineers, to be artists. She was giving them the keys to the kingdom, and in doing so, she was ensuring that her legacy wouldn't be a single, miraculous event, but a living, breathing capability woven into the fabric of the next generation. The most profound change occurred in the Aegis Training Center itself. In the hallowed hall, where the top scores of past simulations were displayed, a new exhibit appeared. It wasn't a glossy photo or a polished plaque. It was a simple, framed printout of the raw data log from the Black Star simulation. It was just lines and lines of alphanumeric code, the digital transcript of Eva's impossible performance. There was no name, no rank, no explanation. At the bottom, a small brass plate was affixed to the frame. It contained only 2 words. The manual, every operator who walked past it understood. It was a shrine not to a person, but to a principle, the quiet, irrefutable power of knowing your job from the foundation up. It was a silent, constant reminder that the most powerful weapon in any arsenal is the well-trained, disciplined mind of a quiet professional. Months bled into a year. The Rostova override was no longer a piece of folklore. It was doctrine. A condensed, teachable version of the Chimera Protocol was now a mandatory part of the final certification for every Aegis tactical director in the United States Navy. The unbeatable Black Star scenario, once a tool for inducing humility through failure, was now the final exam for graduation, officially renamed Rostova's Gambit, and for the first time, teams were starting to beat it. They weren't as fast as she was, not as elegant, but they were succeeding. They were opening the cage. Her quiet work in the server rooms had borne fruit, creating a cadre of operators who understood the soul of their machine. The impact rippled beyond the training centers. During a tense standoff in the Strait of Hormuz, an American destroyer, the USS Decatur, was targeted by a sophisticated electronic warfare attack from shore-based batteries, blinding its systems in a way that mimicked the opening moments of the Black Star scenario. As panic began to set in on the bridge, the ship's young tactical director, a lieutenant who had been one of the smirking ensigns in the training center that fateful day, took a deep breath, pushed his touchscreen aside, and brought his hands to the manual keyboard. He didn't have Eva's speed or her encyclopedic knowledge, but he had her philosophy. He manually rebooted the radar array, purged the false signals, and restored the tactical picture just in time to identify and neutralize a volley of anti-ship missiles. He hadn't performed a miracle, but he had averted a catastrophe. He had applied the lesson. The incident was classified, but the message made its way back to Admiral Rostova. His daughter hadn't just saved a virtual carrier. She had saved a real destroyer and the lives of its crew. The legacy was no longer theoretical. It was real. Eva, for her part, had finally accepted a formal position. She wasn't an instructor in a lecture hall, but the head of a new Red Team division, a group of elite specialists tasked with finding and exploiting vulnerabilities in the Navy's own systems. She had assembled a small, eclectic team of master coders, veteran technicians, and brilliant eccentrics, all quiet professionals like herself, people who had been overlooked by the traditional career path. They were the ghosts in the machine, the guardians of the Foundation, tasked with making the Navy's systems stronger by relentlessly trying to break them. They worked out of an old, repurposed warehouse, far from the polished corridors of power, and they were more effective than any commission or committee. The story of her vindication had become institutional scripture, a teaching tool for every new recruit who stepped foot in an academy or training center. It was a lesson about assumptions, a lesson about the danger of confusing a loud voice with a strong one, and a quiet presence with a weak one. It taught them to look past the surface, to respect the grizzled Master Chief as much as the fresh-faced officer, to understand that the person with the least to say is often the one with the most to offer. It was a story about how a single act of quiet competence could recalibrate an entire culture, reminding a generation of warriors that victory is forged not in arrogance, but in humility, discipline, and a profound, silent mastery of one's craft. True legacy is not a monument you build to yourself. It is not a name carved in stone or a list of accolades read at a ceremony. It is not the story of what you did, but the continuation of that work in the hands of others. It is the seed of an idea that is planted, tended, and allowed to grow into a forest, providing shade and strength long after the planter is gone. Eva Rostova's legacy was not the framed printout on the wall, nor the whispers of the Chimera's gambit in the fleet. Her true legacy was in the hands of the young lieutenant on the bridge of the USS Decatur, his fingers confidently finding the manual keys in a moment of crisis. It was in the quiet confidence of a new generation of operators who now saw their systems not as magical black boxes, but as instruments they could master, command, and, if necessary, bend to their will. It was in the subtle cultural shift away from celebrating the loudest voice in the room toward respecting the most capable hands. Commander Davis had seen a relic. Admiral Rostova had seen an architect. The difference was perspective. Davis saw only the surface, the age, the lack of ostentatious decoration. He judged the book by its plain, unassuming cover. The Admiral, however, possessed the wisdom to look deeper, to recognize the foundation beneath the facade. He knew that the most critical components of any great structure are the ones you cannot see. The deep pilings, the reinforced steel, the meticulous design that allows the soaring, visible spires to exist. Eva was the foundation. Her silence was not emptiness, but depth. Her calm was not passivity, but control. Her age was not obsolescence, but mastery. She represented the enduring truth that competence is its own authority. It requires no announcement, no validation from the ignorant, no permission from the arrogant. It simply is, and when called upon, it performs. Her story became a powerful metaphor within the Navy, a reminder that for every spear tip that flies, there's a quiet, steady hand that forged and sharpened it. For every celebrated victory, there are 1,000 unseen hours of practice, study, and silent discipline. The world will always have its share of loud, superficial gatekeepers who mistake their position for expertise. But they are temporary. They are foam on the surface of the ocean. The real power lies in the deep, silent currents below, the currents of knowledge, skill, and unwavering professionalism that move the world forward. That is the ultimate triumph. Not the public shaming of an arrogant man, but the quiet, enduring empowerment of 1,000 competent ones. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance and where silent discipline defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.